After today, really just seeing how DeSantis is got conviction for what he wants to do for our country, I am starting to stray toward his direction.
I think it was a great opening speech. I mean, he kind of laid out a good case for why he'd make a great president.
I think he did great. I was honestly undecided when I started, when I came in, and he said all the things that I wanted to hear.
Welcome back to America Decides. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is in Iowa courting supporters following his first few campaign events in the Hawkeye State. Later this week, former President Donald Trump will also visit Iowa to continue his campaign. DeSantis has finally taken the offensive against Trump, who's been criticizing the Florida governor for months. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me from Pella, Iowa. Ed, great to see you and that beautiful Iowa backdrop behind you. Nice to be out on the campaign trail again. So you've been following DeSantis in his first swing through the state as an official candidate. And what's interesting, and I know you've noted this before, is that he is showing a willingness to go after former President Trump after months, really, of attacks. What do you make of that, and how is that kind of fitting in to his pitch to Iowa voters at this point?
Directly to voters in a church hall or a wedding venue like this one, it appears to be a little more subtle or softer. He pointed out last night, for example, that when he was last here a few weeks ago, he managed to show up in the Des Moines area and he thought the weather was great, which was a subtle nod to anybody who's been paying attention to the fact that former President Trump had to cancel an event in the same area of Des Moines out of concern for a tornado watch, which never materialized into an actual tornado. So it's those kind of subtle jabs you hear in his remarks to voters. But then under questioning by reporters later, he was a little more direct, making clear that he doesn't think former President Trump can find the support necessary to win a general election, and also found that, or argued that in 2022 he won by such a decisive margin in Florida, he argues, because he had proven to voters who maybe were skeptical of him during his first run in 2018 that he was too much like former President Trump, arguing now that he's become a far different Republican and somebody that can stand on his own. So we'll see as it continues here in Iowa and then New Hampshire and South Carolina later this week and beyond, whether the attacks on Trump become more direct when he's talking to voters, whether he just keeps at it more directly when he's talking to us in the media, understanding that part of the reason his numbers have fallen back as much as they have is because the former president filled the space by attacking DeSantis, raising questions about his leadership, some of which he's now had to backtrack because he realized he was miscalculating. But there's been an effect. And so DeSantis, eager to join the fray and to take it to the former president, now more willing openly to discuss it when he's asked.
And Ed, you mentioned Florida. I know that you were down in Florida a couple of weeks ago reporting about the end of the legislative session when DeSantis had signed a whole bunch of bills. How much is he talking about Florida in Iowa? In other words, how much is this a campaign kind of running as an experienced governor from a state like Florida?
That's what it's all about. He has argued, his team had argued in the lead up to this launch of the campaign that, you know, people have heard of him. Governor of Florida took on COVID, is taking on Disney, but they may not realize the extent to which he's enacted such an impressively conservative agenda, restricting access to abortion services, flying immigrants out of the state, making changes to education policy that bar any discussion of gender or sexual identity now to some extent, banning diversity, equity, inclusion programs at public universities or public funding for them at public universities, changing death penalty laws, all sorts of things that make heads nod and hands come together in applause here in Iowa, you know, campaign venues. The other thing he's going to be talking a lot more about now, as he signaled last night, is the fact that in his view, he has now been able to put in place the most conservative state Supreme Court in the country by nominating and getting confirmed 7 different Republican appointees to the state Supreme Court, reminding voters, because there was interest in this and concern back in 2016, that the next president, especially if they get 2 terms, which he would like to do, might have the opportunity to appoint up to 4 Supreme Court justices, succeeding the older ones and maybe others who, for whatever reason, step away. So, you know, all of it right now is about explaining his record. And then he's got his wife with him, Casey DeSantis, his most trusted aide, as one spouse would normally be, but somebody who's also served as a pretty shrewd strategist, who then tries to lighten it up and talk about their young children. They have 3 young children, the issues they face as parents on Saturday mornings when there's dance class and t-ball. You and I both are familiar with that idea. And that is designed to pull at the heartstrings of the younger voters that show up, or maybe the grandparents who do and remember when they were young parents or know that their children are. So there's a sort of a 1-2 punch there, who he is as a person and all the work he's been doing as a governor.
And kind of a contrast in that way to Trump and perhaps even Biden in terms of age.
Exactly.
Obviously, next week, it's going to be an even more crowded field. We are expecting Governor Christy to announce a presidential run next week. We're also seeing, we also have reporting here at CBS News that former Vice President Mike Pence is planning to announce a run next week. How does this change the dynamics of this race? It seems like the more crowded the field, the better that is for Trump. But what do Pence and Christie kind of bring to the table here?
It's a good question. I think you're going to see them handle this a little differently. Pence is going to be here in Iowa constantly, believing that he can win over the evangelical, Christian, socially conservative vote, and essentially try to mount what amounts to a campaign for governor by being here all the time, although he won't be the only one. Christie, at least in the early reporting, it suggested he's going to be relying on a national campaign and earned media. Well, that's political strategist for we got no money and no staff. And so the more airtime we get, the more we hope to climb in the polls. Will either of those strategies work? We'll see. But as we remember from 2016, the more crowded the Republican field gets, the easier it is for Donald Trump to hold on to that, high 20s, 30, maybe 40% of the vote that's with him.
Yeah, and why he's welcoming some of these candidates into the race. But it will be interesting to see what he has to say about his former running mate. Ed in Iowa, great to see you. Thanks for your reporting, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.